Oh, all right. I think we are live. Hello, everyone. Sorry, my background is kind of crazy. At least we have the Last Supper up there. We don't have a light switch covers, but we have the Last Supper. So that's all that matters. So anyway, I'm actually in my dining room at the moment. I am moving a bunch of stuff, and I have walls that are no longer blue and green, so that's awesome. So they need like one more coat of paint, and then these walls will be done. I have to do the trim and the windows, blah, 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 hang up curtains and lighting, but we're coming along. We're making progress. It's better than the horrible blue and green. Oh my goodness. It was bad. It was really bad. So hope everybody's having an awesome weekend. I want to read. I really am probably going to spend like a week or so on Blessed Anna Maria Taigi. And so I don't know if I'm saying that right. Taigi. I think it's actually spelled different in Italian. It's like with an E, and there's a mistranslation. But anyway, it's by Albert Bessiers, S.J., translated by Reverend Stephen Rigby. And so I don't really want to talk about her visions or her mystical experiences, although that'll be like sprinkled in here and there. But I really want to talk about her as a person and more so focus on her as a wife and a mother, and then focus on her family, because here's the situation we find ourselves in. As Catholics, or just like as people in general, as humans in general in the West, but more specifically as Catholics, and it's such a shame that we have lost our way as Catholics, because we're supposed to be the ones leading the charge, if you will, on the sanctity of the family, really. So we have lost our way. Feminism, I blame it a lot on feminism. Men don't know how to be men. Women don't know how to be women. Men and women don't know how to relate to each other. And it's very obvious. We find ourselves in a situation where people don't want to get married. People don't understand what marriage even is. People don't want to have kids, birth control, abortion. And so all of this is leading us into the spiral of doom. We are in a spiral of doom and gloom. And the only way out of it, in my opinion, barring divine intervention, is going to be to reestablish authentic Catholicism within the family. So reestablish the Catholic model for families. I really do feel like that's probably the only way out of this. And that's going to take a lot of swimming upstream. But that's cool. That's what we're here to do. And this is an area that I am by no means a professional on. Y'all know my backgrounds. 2 kids out of wedlock, never even been married sacramentally in the church. So I've had a long way to go of trying to discover what it means to live in a family, what it means to be married. And so I've done this really as a single person for the most part. And so we have to be patient with each other. So if you find yourself in a relationship or in a marriage and things really aren't going your way, or even if you find yourself single trying to date, which is my current situation, we have to remember to be patient, because we have lost our way. And so we're lost. We're completely lost. So we have to be patient with each other. Instead of getting frustrated and mad at each other, we have to help each other along, try to point out the right direction and things like that. So that's really what I want to do. And so I was searching out saints and blesseds that were not religious, that were not nuns or priests, so for my own purposes, for my own knowledge, so I can have role models, because I don't have role models really other than the saints. That's all I've got. I don't have any earthly role models that are living an authentic Catholic life. And that's what I want. I want to live a Catholic life. I want to do things the way of God. And I want to be married and have more children and raise my kids to know what a family, know what marriage is supposed to look like and what a family is supposed to look like and things like that. But since I have nothing to go on, it was never taught to me. Society makes you want to do the opposite. We've all been kind of brainwashed. And then looking around, I don't see this being practiced anywhere. I have to seek it out. So the only way I know how to do that really is other than the catechism, and then people on YouTube, like, Steph and Tim Gordon reading their books, but the saints The saints are a huge help. So that's why I'm trying to seek out non-religious saints. So I want to, like I said, I'm going to spend like a week pretty much, probably at least I would say a good amount of time on her. And I'm not going to read word for word every single chapter, but I am going to do a lot of reading. So the first one I want to start with is I'm going to skip over kind of a lot of it, but it's the first section of the book. It's called Preparation, and it just talks about Anna's like early childhood kind of thing, or her early life before she was married and before she was really called to be a saint, if you will. And she, so sometimes the writer calls her Annette in this, or Beata. So I don't know why that is, but sometimes he does. So I'm just giving you the heads up. If you hear that, that's who he's referring to. So Anna Maria was born at Siena on May 29th, 1769. She opened her eyes to a world in chaos, very like our own. In France, the court of Louis XV sunk into debauchery, intrigues, and factions, prepared the way for its ruin and that of Christianity. And so it's so fascinating, right? So she was born in the 1700s, right before the fall of Christendom in Europe, really, because it started with the French Revolution, and right before America came around, right before the birth of America, right? So America was born, we could say 1776. She comes along 1769. And we know that America has done a lot to broadcast the destruction of the family. America has a big responsibility to play, a big part to play in the destruction of the family, spreading the Enlightenment ideas. So we really see Anna Maria being born in this time, like right before the tyranny, is what I call it, of the Enlightenment, right before, the Freemasonic ideas took hold, with pushing their agenda of really destroying the family, destroying society, destroying the Christian world order. And so we see her being raised up right as this is going on. I find it so interesting that God chose to raise up this saint right when all this was going on. I hear water. Okay. So the minister Choiseul rejoiced to see the press flood France with literature that scoffed at traditional beliefs. The encyclopedia, for a while suppressed, thrived anew, and Voltaire was in the ascent. As an old man of 75, he inundated the world with his encyclicals, in quotation marks. The vitality of all things was sapped at the root, the church morals and royalty. Jeering displaced discussion. Vice was brazen and shameless. Louis XV, at 60, put the finishing touches to his royal disgrace. The libertines, to dissuade him from a new marriage which might have reclaimed him, threw him a woman taken from the gutter by the name of Du Barry. The price of bread rose. The national deficit touched 74 millions. The people murmured. The young prince, whose inclement destiny it was to become Louis XVI, married an Austrian archduchess, the unfortunate Marie Antoinette. Magnificent. By the way, she never said, "Let them eat cake." That's a liberal lie. That's fake news. She never said that. Just throwing that out there. Magnificent celebrations were sullied by the presence of Mimi Du Barry and by the blood of 1,200 Parisians, whom the firework display threw into a panic. At Rome reigns Clement the 14th, who is about to suppress the Jesuits at the instigation of the Bourbons. The most Catholic nations are dragged into this whirlpool: Spain, Italy, Poland. The nobility of the last were second to none in godlessness. Even the king sold his motherland. A Masonic temple was installed at Warsaw on July 7th, 1770, and the nuncio reported 250 carriages drawn up at its gate and the flower of the nobility thronging into it. The very princesses craved the honor of Masonic affiliation, following the example of the Princess de Lamballe. The Duke of Orleans, Philip Egalité, was to be president of French Freemasonry. right? So check that out. The Duke of Orleans was to be president of French Freemasonry. So this is the time period in which Anne Maria Taigi, known for being a very holy mother and wife, was raised up by God. Keep that in mind, because we know that the last battle is over the family. And so God has given us role models to look at and say, okay, this is how I have to model my life. Okay. At Siena, the home of Anna Maria, the Jesuits, driven from their college, had to live as seculars. And then it goes into her early family, which I'm not going to get into, but they ended up moving from Siena to Rome. Is how she ended up in Rome. She was baptized the day after her birth. Yeah, I'm not going to really get into that. Her husband, who he gave his deposition, really gave a very long interview about all the details of her life, said that her parents were good Catholics. They saw to it that she received an excellent education and that she attended the sacraments in due course. Okay. She was popular. She was very pretty, from what I understand. She was beautiful, even as a child. And so we see later on that kind of plays a part in why she ended up becoming kind of like a, plain, not wearing fancy stuff, not, because she was so pretty that she gave into vanity a lot of times. So God corrects that in her, gives her the grace to correct that. Okay. When she was 13, the world buzzed with Necker's sensational experiments in finance and with battles. Louis the 16th opened his reign in a cloud of wars. France and America fight England, winning the recognition of American independence. Monarchical arms founded a republic, new ideas triumph. The passion of Rome and France is for Diderot d'Alembert, the contract, social, and balloons. Man has conquered the skies and beaten the gods was the cry. Mesmerism becomes a religion for the fashionable. Beaumarchus produces The Marriage of Figaro. The king himself joins the applauding mob at theatrical shows that mock at lords and royalty, religion, and morals. At this time, she's working in a silk shop. She winds silk and cuts dresses in a shop run by two old ladies. And then she eventually moves on from that. It says this twilight existence had its reactions on the young Anna. Her first biographer said that this was a tempestuous years that preceded her attainment to grace. The world, he says, smiled on her. She had a youth's natural desire to taste its joys. Okay, so let's get into... She gets married to a man named Domenico, I guess, is how, I don't know how you'd say that in Italian. Domenico. He was entered correctly on the servant's role of the Taigi palace. He was a porter for the prince or somebody like that. But that's how they met. Her family works in one palace. He worked in another. And that's how they met. And they were married. I think it only took like 40 days or something to arrange it. And they were married. He was a fascinating character. He was not a saint. He was a brute. He had a wicked temper. He was explosive, but he loved Anna Maria dearly. And he was, while I don't believe his faith was as strong as hers, he did practice the faith. He did, they were married in the church, all the stuff, obviously, and he protected her. He really played this role of protector. He would not let any harm come to her. He protected her heart and her sanctity, her virtue, her dignity, and her physical body as well. He would keep her in line as far as her extreme penance would go. She would do really extreme penance for the conversion of sinners, and he would, watch her, keep an eye on her. And if he noticed that she wasn't eating for days at a time, or, he would tell her to eat or tell her to drink. And being a good wife who was obedient to her husband, she would listen to him. And so when we talk about these things, about how to function in a marriage, there's one thing I want to point out. This is reserved for marriage, okay? It says in scripture, wives, submit to your husbands, okay? That doesn't mean you submit to every Tom and Larry off the street that wants to date you and not marry you. This sacredness of husband protecting wife and wife submitting to husband is reserved for marriage. And I really found in my experience since my conversion that this is a lost concept. Just the last relationship I came out of, he really desired to live as a married couple and participate in the things reserved for marriage without actually making the commitment and being married. And the reason why this is a problem is because we are human and we have a fallen nature. And so the only way that you have the grace to be able to persevere in that relationship, especially when you have strong personalities on both sides, is through the sacrament of marriage. So it is a sacrament because when you get married in the eyes of God, the right way, sacramentally in the church, it becomes a channel and you receive the graces needed to be able to live in that relationship and live in that setting for the purposes of sanctity rather than the purposes of human fallenness, human pleasure, or whatever the case may be. And so it's very important that when we read this stuff, we understand that this is the model of a sacramental marriage. If the marriage isn't sacramental, then or the relationship isn't a sacramental marriage, and that's the first thing that has to be accomplished. And so a lot of people have this idea today that we should live together and try it out before we get married. But that's a recipe for disaster because it's going to fail ultimately because you don't have the grace. You're not receiving the graces needed to live with that person. And so we'll see here how they were very different. They had many differences, but in a way, their differences complemented each other. And because the Holy Spirit was able to work in the relationship, the relationship itself was able to work. So I just wanted to, I know that was kind of a long tangent, but I wanted to point that out because it's very important and it's a problem I myself am running into. Okay, so she did consider briefly the possibility of a vocation into religious life, but ultimately she was not called to that. She was called to marriage. So let's see. She was married. There was something I wanted to... Let me see. Hold on. Okay, he was born, so this is about the husband, Domenico. He was born in 1761, and he too came to Rome to improve his prospects. He was a descendant of the Count Palatine and became a porter in the service of Prince Taigi's cook, carrying sacks of vegetables, loads of wood, piles of plates, an occupation which made him somewhat stooped. All the same, he was handsome. He was a good-looking youth with black curly hair, of medium height and robust constitution. His morals were without stain, his piety solid. But as the decree of beatification puts it, his manners were rough and uncultured, and his temperament unamiable. Thus, his character was a perfect contrast to that of the Beata. He was slow in understanding, pig-headed and turbulent. She was sensitive, pliant, and gentle, born in the most civilized town of the peninsula. Thus was made a perfect household. The Taigi Palace occupies the whole of the north of the Colonna Square, and one of its facades gives into the Corso. So he would bring food to Madame Sarah. Mussolini, before taking up his quarters at the Palace of Venice, considered the Taigi Palace fit to be the headquarters of the fascist regime, on a side note. Okay, so then they talk about the palace. He played a humble part in the household of the prince. He gave a long deposition, which one delights to read. He shows a robust common sense and a piety inexpressive but solid. It casts a light upon the comment attributed to Prince Taigi as he slapped his good servant upon the shoulder and said, "I am certain you will enter paradise carrying the whole Taigi family on your back." Okay. Hold on. Humble folk do not go in for a long-winded discipline. Okay, so he found favor in Anna's eyes, and both sides made careful inquiries about the other. All the world knows no one is perfect and that the cross has to be borne, and then hard work has no time for sentimental theorizing. So they did it pretty quickly. Okay, so my mother told me that if she arranged everything within 40 days, it was because she did not, this is Anna's child saying this, because she did not want to be forever at home warming the seat, to get on with it once she was assured of a good and honorable future. Delay could only bring boredom and danger. She never regretted her action. My father was a rough character, and anyone but my mother would certainly have repented of marrying such a man. But although he tried her patience sorely, she was always glad that she had married him. The betrothal arrangements being concluded in November, Anna, her mother, and Madame Sarah set about gathering the trousseau, and the marriage was solemnized by the parish priest of St. Marcel in the Corso on January 7th, 1790. The morning after the Epiphany, everybody concerned went to Holy Communion. There was an excellent dinner. Annette, he calls her Annette here, and Domenico found the courage not to feel too keenly the incompatibilities that divided them. These came later in the strain and clash of life. It was the marriage of a wolf and a lamb, but the lamb softened the wolf. And it always reminds me of the movie Beauty and the Beast. I used to make this reference a lot because my last relationship was a lot like Beauty and the Beast. But it's like, I think it was G.K. Chesterton who said, the one lesson we can learn from Beauty and the Beast is that a person has to be loved in order to be able to love. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like that. And we see with that movie, obviously, he's a selfish beast. And then Belle comes along and she shows him love, and he ends up loving her, and he turns into a human. And it's such an allegory for human beings. The softening of the hearts. God says, I'll break their hearts from stone and give them hearts of flesh, basically. Stop drinking my coffee. Speaking of living in a family, do not drink my coffee. Thank you. So anyway, but it just goes to show, I think today we have this false idea that, we have to perfectly get along and we have to perfectly be in the same part of spiritual journey and all this stuff. And it's just that's not the way it's ever been understood in Catholicism. Yeah, obviously you both need to practice the faith. That's for sure. You both need to practice the faith. But if you find yourself in a position where one of you is not practicing the faith, love is the answer. So anyway, I'll get into that later, but it says, it was the marriage of a wolf and a lamb, but the lamb softened the wolf. It is false, said Pius IX on April 30th, 1876, to some pilgrims from Tow House, to say that diversity of character is necessarily an obstacle to the union of husband and wife. Recall to your minds the chariot which Ezekiel saw drawn by 4 animals, the ferocity of the lion united in accord with the wisdom of man, the speed of the eagle and the slowness of the ox. Natures so diverse did not prevent all from working together in peace. The chariot moved rhythmically because it was directed by the one same Spirit of God. And there is the answer. That's the solution, right? So no matter the differences, as long as it's being directed by the Spirit of God, it will be successful. Make a generous sacrifice of your own inclinations to God, and God will inspire you with his counsels. Therein lay the whole secret of the blessed Taigi model of wives, self-renunciation. The wolf will rage, but a smile and a still tongue will appease his wrath. And that is not something you hear in 2023 in regards to marriage. We have feminism has ruined us as women. It really has, and it's really sad. And so I apologize on behalf of all women to men for the stress that we have put you under, but you have to be patient with us because we have been lied to for generations now about what it means to be a woman. So Prince Taigi put 2 rooms on the ground floor for them. The first year of marriage was celebrated in the flower of her youth. At the age of 20, Anna Maria, to please her husband, sacrificed a little to the vanities of the world and avoided neither coquetry in dress nor care to her hair. But do not let us be too solemn about this. If the good Domenico saved up to buy a red silk dress for his darling, earrings, and a necklace of pearls, in place of that of coral and gold given by Madame Sarah, it was surely fit that she would wear them. Father Bouffier, discerning of eye, even if a trifle solemn, writes, born in Siena, brought up at Rome, Anna Maria was Italian by blood, race, and warmth of temperament, ever ready for distraction, ever quick to gaiety, ever eager to indulge in laughter and song, and delighting in making the most that her lowly state permitted of the fresh beauty of her 20 years. And it's so true. I was laughing at that because my Italian family is so much like that. If the memories of her maidenhood recalled the presentments of danger, now that she had a protector, she was under his shadow, sheltered from every fear, and in the innocence of her heart, she gave herself a free hand. She was not apprehensive about her salvation. She gave without fail, are you kidding? Due measure to the duties and practices of religion. So, my kids, man, they're funny. Little spies over here. But anyway, so I find it interesting that she was married at, I believe, like at 20, or I guess that was her first years of marriage. They're talking about her at 20 years old. She didn't receive her calling really to sanctity or, start receiving mystical stuff and things like that until after she was married. And so for me, it goes back to something that St. Hildegard said. St. Hildegard had a vision. And in this vision, there was like 3 groups of people. And within one of these groups of people, it was like the people who were walking towards God, not necessarily because they saw God and had their eyes fixed on God, but they had their eyes fixed on those who had their eyes fixed on God. And so in the plan of salvation, a lot of times I hear women getting frustrated, that their husbands aren't as religious or as spiritual as them. But maybe you're part of his plan for salvation. Okay. So maybe by him, protecting and guarding and loving you and having his eyes fixed on you, just like Domenico did, that in turn will sanctify him. I think it was St. Jose Esquervo, I forget how to say his name, said that husbands are called primarily to love Christ through their wives. That's why it's obviously a sacrament. And so just by loving each other in that way can lead to holiness and sanctity. And that was really the case in this marriage. Obviously, he was not having mystical visions. He probably didn't even really understand what was happening to his wife and things like that. But he honored her and guarded her and protected her. And you have to think of it like this. Like, obviously, God chose Anna Maria to raise up as a saint. And so her husband's role in that was to, like St. Joseph, to protect that, to protect her, to protect the family, and give her the resources, if you will, to be able to live up to that. And in that way, that's how he served God in kind of an indirect way. So, let's see. Her other biographer. Okay, so she was given to vanity William, please. It's not funny. It's not funny. I'm doing a live stream. It's so not funny. See? All right, go find something to do for a minute. I'm almost done. Okay, I lost my... We are here in the year 1790 through 1791. The storm that is to purify the world has broken, but God has not opened the eyes of this. Okay, so it's talking about Anna Maria. So she goes, all right, so the momentum of the revolution gathers violence. At Paris, the National Assembly, convoked by Louis the 16th, calls itself the Constituent Assembly and proclaims the rights of man, forgetting the rights of God. The secularization of church goods is the first example of contempt of the rights of men necessarily involved in the contempt of the rights of God. Then the civil constitution of the clergy attacked the rights of conscience after the attack on the right of property. There followed the suppression of chapters, abbeys, convents, religious were expelled, churches desecrated. The nomination of priests and bishops rested upon the votes of the people. The 50,000 priests who refused to take the oath to the civil constitution were hunted, put in prison, and massacred. Pius VI is punished for having condemned the heretical constitution by the confiscation of Avignon in the county of Venezuela. Monarchs, either trembling for their thrones or won over to philosophicism, remained deaf to the warnings of the pontiff, not seeing that this first violation of rights would beget others that would sweep away those very thrones for which they trembled. Louis XVI ascended the scaffold on January 21st, 1793, and Pius VI, with courage, spoke the praises of the ill-starred king, condemning over and over again the acts of the regicide assembly. The assembly turned upon him in its wrath and decreed the end of the papacy and the church. These events were to convulse Rome. And y'all think we have problems now. I mean, we do, but Anna Maria smiled into her mirror and frequented the Corso and the play. We have now reached the last crisis on Anna's road to Damascus. And so all of this is going on. She's oblivious. And then God really makes her uncomfortable. And she has this huge, I wouldn't say conversion because she was already practicing and she believes, but she levels up, if you will. Okay. So an increasing sense of spiritual disturbance began to mingle with Anna's frivolities, as they say. So there's a bunch of stuff that happens, and then there's this like adjustment period where after she receives the call to sainthood, her life changes and she's not able to, wear all these fancy clothes anymore. And so Domenico in that way too has to make sacrifices, but she still would not, he put his foot down and she would listen. And so he was willing to, compromise some things, such as, her wearing the fancy stuff. They would still go to the theater and the play and things like that. And for her, it was more of a penance, and he could see that she would obey him. If he wanted to go, they would go. And he could see that it was not making her happy. And so he stopped asking her to go. So things like that. Where he put his foot down was living as brother and sister. So not having sexual relations. He said absolutely not. And she should have been a nun. And so after that, she switched confessors. And so that they didn't live as brother and sister. They always lived as husband and wife. And she obeyed him. Whatever he said, she obeyed. But he always had her best interest at heart. I think he was given a grace to be able to naturally just have her best interests at heart. Okay. This was so this was interesting. I have chosen her. I call her to sanctity. Such was the message heard by Father Angelo. God had decreed that this woman of 21 years, who was suckling a newborn baby, was to be a saint and a bulwark of the church. We should only waste our time trying to analyze the miracle of vocation which changed the profligate officer Charles de... Okay, so I'm not going to go into that, but She was a young woman of lowly birth and no learning, who at 20 filled the thoughts of the most famous of her time. Oh, they're talking about St. Catherine. They're comparing her to St. Catherine. But anyway, it is towards the end of 1790. Anna and Napoleon are both 21, so they were born within a couple months of each other. Napoleon will be a general at 24, commander-in-chief of the army of Italy at 26. The career of the two adversaries is about to develop with a bewildering rapidity, but the development of the Beata will be 1,000 times more rapid. While Napoleon still considers which way lies success and hovers between revolution and reaction, Anna, fixed in the eternal, lives a life that is one long miracle. Annette told Father Angelo that God was calling her to be a victim of expiation for the sins of the world. To help her in this vocation, he recommended her to become a Tiratari of the Order of the Trinity. And so I find that interesting because there's a lot of prophecies associated with an order like that. I'm not going to get into it at this time, but it was an order founded by St. John de Matha and St. Felix de Valois. Its third order counted a great number of popes, kings, and queens who, like Anna, were proud to carry its white scapular with its red and blue cross. It was not Father Angelo, but a Trinitarian, Father Fernandez, I don't know, who brought the matter to a happy issue. Domenico, her husband, consented, and he says the following in his deposition. She was devoted to the holy mysteries, especially to that of the Most Holy Trinity. She asked my permission to take the habit of the tertiaries of this order, and I willingly gave my consent. Father Ferdinand of the monastery of St. Carlino received her, but only on the condition that she would always fulfill her duties as wife and mother. For a married woman is no longer mistress of herself, but is subject to the man. Such were the conditions. She ever observed them with a prompt obedience and wholehearted fidelity. There arose a complication, and I just told you that was in relation to the sexual stuff. Okay, and so there was problems with her spiritual directors and her confessors, and our Lord said to her, our Lord made up for what was wanting in her directors. I shall myself be your guide in the way of perfection, he told her, and he kept his promise by an uninterrupted converse with her. And so there was a lot of conversations. Anna was at times disquieted. Was it the good or the evil spirit that spoke to her? You must know, said Jesus to her, that when I speak to you, I produce in you tenderness, peace, compunction, above all, humility. Know well, my daughter, that no matter how much he desires to love me, if a man enter not the straight path of humility, he will keep on stumbling. Man has within himself a dust that settles round his heart. It is called self-love. Man is full of pride, and I have nothing to do with the proud. Only the humble will find favor in my sight. He who wishes to taste my delights must despise the world, and I expect to be despised by it in return. I make my abode in humble souls that are full of simplicity. The more lowly and uncultured they are, the more I take pleasure in them. As to these wise and learned professors, whose heads are full of the fumes of pride, I put them down from their seats, and you yourself shall soon learn where I send them. Thus ends their false wisdom and self-advertisement. O my daughter, I exalt those who humble themselves. They merit my kingdom. And to these I unfold all my secrets. Love then to meet with contempt, for love of contempt is the true foundation of virtue. Like all the souls whose uplifting is described by St. John of the Cross, Anna experienced depressions and disgusts after her transports. Jesus rebuked her, daughter, when the soul is fervent, it ought to humble itself and not be so self-sure, for otherwise it makes hasty promises, and then when coolness returns, it becomes timid and full of fears. Every soul starting on the spiritual life should pray in this way. O God, who art so great and powerful, do with thy servant what thou wishes, provided he does thy will. I am determined to endure all thou wishes me to suffer, But remember, nonetheless, I am good for nothing. Souls who seek perfection should never for a moment forget that Peter, my beloved apostle, made promises in a moment of great fervor, and then when the moment of trial came, he forgot my love. Remember, daughter, what I have so often told you, namely that men are like weathercocks that spin on the housetops. If my grace did not preserve them, they would turn with every change of the winds. Then she provoked a lot of criticism. So as Annette was not living exactly in a desert, her devotion soon provoked criticism. Priests gave the example. Devout people were not slow to follow their lead. Anna was upset by it. And Jesus says, you are in too much of a hurry, my daughter. Repress this natural impetuosity of yours. Live in peace and roll the world under your feet. Remember that if a soul tries to fly from the cross I have given him, I promptly load him with a much heavier one. What, my daughter? You who are so thirsty for suffering, let yourself be so quickly overwhelmed with sadness, but you know well, not with the juice box bubble, come on, nobody wants to hear you slurping. But you know well and understand that you shall suffer unto the end. All right, so this is getting long, so I'm actually going to stop it here, and I will pick up tomorrow. I'm going to go to the chat. Hi, Katie. Is the ex-smoking room? No. So that my porch is actually going to be, it's my dad's workshop right now where he's doing my floors from. So it's probably going to be last. So yeah. And my kids are out of control. Yeah. My son, he's a jokester. He's an entertainer. But anyway, so I'll pick this up where I left off tomorrow. And I just kind of wanted to introduce Blessed Anna Maria Taigi. I feel like she's one of those ones everybody likes to pick up, cherry pick her fantastical mysticism and all that without really understanding who she is. And we have to understand, y'all, there is a reason God chooses who he chooses for miracles and things like that. It's because he wants us to look into who they are so we can mimic them and copy them. That's why I really have a problem kinds of with the charismatic movement, because it's almost like people seeking after the icing on the cake, and like the charisms are really reserved for like these holy people so that we can look at them doing these extraordinary things and then look into their spirituality and see how they lived and see what they did. And God raises these people up during these certain times like we're seeing for a reason. So anyway, I hope y'all have a blessed Sunday. Pray for the families. Say a rosary for families. Say a rosary for marriages. Anyway, Joan of Arc Media out.